The dust was a living thing in Redemption Creek. It clung to Ilara's sweat-soaked dress, coated her eyelashes, and settled on the thin, papery skin of her baby, Lily. Ilara had been a woman of some standing once, a farmer's wife in a small settlement 100 miles east. But the fever had taken her husband Thomas and left her with nothing but a handful of coins and a promise to a dying man. "Get to a town, Ilara. Find a doctor for the baby." The promise was all that had kept her going. She clutched Lily tighter, the baby's small, hot body a fragile anchor in her world. They were at the edge of town, a collection of ramshackle wooden buildings and dirt roads. The sun beat down relentlessly, making the air shimmer. She had a few coins left, enough for a meal maybe, but Lily needed milk, and the coins wouldn't stretch for both. She spotted the general store, its faded sign creaking in the dry breeze. Taking a deep breath, she pushed through the door, the bell above jangling a sharp, metallic announcement. The scent of coffee beans, leather, and cheap tobacco filled the air. The storekeeper, a man with a thick, greying moustache and a suspicious squint, looked up from his ledger. "What can I do for you, miss?" he asked, his voice gruff. Ilara's throat felt dry. She unwrapped the shawl from around Lily. It was her mother's, a thing of intricate white lace and silk, a stark contrast to the grime of the West. It was the only thing of value she had left. I need milk," she said, her voice a whisper. "For my baby. I don't have enough money, but I have this." She held out the shawl. "Will you take this for a gallon of milk?" The man's eyes narrowed, taking in the beautiful fabric and then her ragged appearance. He snorted. "A fancy shawl won't feed you, miss. This is a store, not a charity." Tears welled in Ilara's eyes, hot and stinging. She tried to swallow the lump in her throat. "Please, she's so small. She needs it." Just as the storekeeper was about to dismiss her again, a deep, quiet voice came from behind her. "Hold on now, Jebediah." A man stepped forward, emerging from the shadows of the store's back aisle. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained the seams of his denim jacket. His face was weathered, a map of sun creases around his startlingly blue eyes. A cowboy, with a faded bandana tied loosely around his neck and the ever-present scent of horses and campfire smoke. "How about this?" the cowboy said, his gaze steady on Ilara. "I'll buy the milk, and you keep the shawl." Ilara's breath hitched. She was used to suspicion and indifference, not kindness. I can't accept charity, sir." He gave a slow, gentle shake of his head. "It ain't charity. It's a transaction. I get to see a mother and her baby fed. That's a good trade in my book." He turned to the storekeeper. "A gallon of milk, Jeb. Put it on my tab." Jebediah grumbled but complied. The cowboy, Silas, as the storekeeper called him, didn't leave. He waited, his presence a quiet comfort in the cramped store, as Jebediah poured the milk into a glass bottle. He watched Ilara, his expression unreadable, and when she finally took the bottle, her hand trembling, he simply nodded. "Get the baby some rest, miss," he said softly, tipping the brim of his hat. "The world can be hard, but it ain't always cruel." He paid for the milk and walked out, leaving Ilara in the sudden, quiet stillness of the store, a bottle of milk in one hand and the precious shawl clutched in the other. It was the first act of true kindness she had received since Thomas's death, and it felt as vast and life-giving as the sky itself. Silas was not the kind of man to get involved in other people's troubles. He'd seen too much of it. Too many broken dreams and empty promises scatter across the plains like tumbleweeds. But the sight of that woman, Ilara, with the fierce love for her child battling against her overwhelming desperation, had struck a chord. He found her later that evening sitting on the porch of the dilapidated boarding house, a half-empty bottle of milk beside her. Lily was sleeping, her face serene, a small hand curled around her mother's finger. Ilara looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice strained. "I'm not a stray you need to feed." Silas leaned against a support post, his hands in his pockets. "I reckon a body's got a right to help another without being asked. You got a place to stay tonight?" She gestured to the boarding house. "The owner, Mrs. Gable, took pity on me, just for tonight. I don't know what we'll do tomorrow." Silas took in the state of the building, the peeling paint, the sagging porch. It was barely a step up from the street. "My ranch is a few miles out of town," he said, the words feeling strange and heavy on his tongue. "I have a small bunkhouse, plenty of room. It's not much, but it's dry and clean. You and the baby could stay there. You could earn your keep, help with the cooking, tend to the chickens." Ilara's pride bristled. "I can work. I'm not looking for a handout." "Didn't say you were," Silas replied, his voice calm. "I said you could earn your keep. A woman's touch would be a welcome thing around the place. My old foreman's wife used to help out before they moved on." She looked at him, really looked at him, searching his face for any hint of ill intent. She saw only a quiet sincerity. His offer was not one of charity, but of shared hardship, of mutual benefit. The truth was, she had no other choice. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Silas." The next morning, they made the short journey to his ranch. It was a modest spread, a main cabin, a barn, a corral, and the small two-room bunkhouse he'd described. The air was cleaner out here, smelling of sagebrush and earth. The bunkhouse was simple but neat, a twin bed in one room and a small cot in the other. Silas had already laid out fresh sheets and a quilt. He'd even brought a tin cup and a plate. "You'll be safe here," he said, his gaze sweeping the small space. "No one bothers me out here. We're a few hours' ride from the nearest outlaws." Ilara set Lily down on the clean sheets. The baby looked around, her small face alight with a curiosity she hadn't shown in days. A fragile peace settled over Ilara. For the first time in weeks, she felt a small, hesitant flicker of hope. She had milk, a roof over her head, and the quiet, watchful presence of a good man. Days bled into weeks, and weeks into a month. Ilara's presence on the ranch became as natural as the sunrise. She found a rhythm, a purpose beyond simply surviving. She cooked simple, hearty meals, stews with wild onions, biscuits that tasted of her husband's kitchen, and skillet bread that Silas ate with a quiet appreciation. She mended his worn shirts, a task that surprised her with its unexpected intimacy. She cleaned the small cabin and sang soft lullabies to Lily as she did. Silas, for his part, was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He left a bucket of fresh water for her every morning. He brought back an extra blanket from town when the nights grew cold. He built a small, sturdy rocking cradle for Lily, his calloused hands working with a surprising gentleness. He would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set, a silhouette against the vibrant colors of the horizon. Ilara would join him, holding the sleeping Lily. They would sit in comfortable silence, the quiet understanding between them growing stronger with each passing day. One evening, Silas broke the silence. "You miss him?" he asked, his voice low. Ilara's gaze was fixed on the distant hills. "Every day," she said. "He was a good man, kind. He was my whole world." She told him about Thomas, about the small farm they had hoped to build, the simple shared dreams that had been so cruelly taken from them. Silas listened, his face impassive, but his eyes held a depth of understanding that went beyond words. He didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. He simply listened, a silent witness to her grief. "You're strong, Ilara," he said when she was done. "Stronger than most. To keep going, to find your way out here, that takes more grit than a man with a gun." His words, a simple statement of fact, meant more to her than any flowery praise. They were the first acknowledgement of her struggle, the first time someone had seen her not as a broken woman, but as a survivor. In that moment, surrounded by the vast, silent land and the simple, honest presence of Silas, Ilara felt something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. She felt seen. The peace of the ranch was shattered one sweltering afternoon. Two men on horseback rode up the dirt road, their faces obscured by the shadows of their wide-brimmed hats. They were not from around these parts. Ilara knew that much instinctively. Their clothes were too new, their swagger too arrogant. They dismounted, their spurs jingling menacingly. Ilara instinctively moved to the bunkhouse, pulling Lily close. Silas, who had been mending a fence post, stood up straight, his hand resting on the holster of his gun. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he asked, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of steel. "You can," the leader said, a sneer twisting his lips. "We're looking for a woman, goes by the name of Ilara. We heard she might be holed up out here." Ilara's blood ran cold. The men were Thomas's cousins, men he had always warned her to stay away from. They had tried to take their land after his death, claiming they were the rightful heirs. They were ruthless, and they had been a constant threat. "There's no one here by that name," Silas said, his hand slowly, deliberately moving toward his gun. "Don't lie to us, cowboy," the second man spat. "We know who she is. We want what's ours." A flicker of understanding passed between Silas and Ilara. Her life, her struggle, had followed her here. This wasn't just a simple dispute. It was a matter of life and death. The leader saw the movement from the bunkhouse and smiled, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "There she is. Looks like we found what we were looking for." He took a step towards the bunkhouse, but Silas moved faster. He drew his gun, the movement a blur of practiced grace. The sound of the hammer cocking was a sharp punctuation in the silence. "You take another step, and I'll put a bullet through your knee," Silas said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "This land is my land. The people on it are my responsibility. You got a problem with that, you can take it up with me." The two men exchanged a nervous glance. They hadn't expected this. They had expected a single man to back down in the face of two armed intruders. But Silas stood there, a rock in the rising tide, his eyes cold and unwavering. "This ain't over, cowboy," the leader said, his bravado wavering. "You can't hide her forever." "Maybe not," Silas replied, his voice a low growl. "But I can make damn sure you won't be the ones to find her." They backed away slowly, climbed back on their horses, and rode away, leaving a trail of dust and a lingering sense of dread. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken words. Ilara walked out, holding a now crying Lily. "They won't give up," she said, her voice shaking. Silas holstered his gun. He looked at her, his gaze intense. "I know," he said, "but they also know that you're not alone anymore." The confrontation with the outlaws changed everything. The quiet, peaceful existence on the ranch was over, replaced by a constant low-level anxiety. Ilara insisted on helping more, on standing guard while Silas slept, on learning to handle a rifle. Silas, in turn, began to show her how to shoot, his large hands guiding her small ones on the cold metal of the rifle. He wasn't just teaching her to defend herself. He was teaching her to trust herself, to find the strength she didn't know she had. As they practiced, a new dynamic formed between them. It was no longer a relationship of silent benefactor and grateful ward. It was a partnership, a shared purpose. One afternoon, as Ilara was hanging laundry, she saw Silas working on a horse, his movements a perfect blend of strength and patience. He was a man in his element, a natural extension of the rugged land around him. She realized then that she was falling for him. It wasn't a dizzying, reckless kind of love, but a deep, steady affection, born from shared struggles and quiet moments of understanding. That night, as the stars blazed across the vast, dark sky, she found him sitting on the porch, She sat beside him, the silence between them now a comfortable, familiar space. "They wanted the land," she said, her voice soft. "Thomas and I had a small piece of land, a deed. They said it wasn't worth anything. But Thomas saw the spring on it. He thought we could turn it into a homestead. They want it for the water rights." Silas listened, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Water's everything out here," he said, "worth more than gold." "They'll keep coming back," she said, the fear returning. He turned to her, his blue eyes catching the starlight. "Then we'll be ready for them. We'll show them what a man who's got something to lose will do to protect it." His words were a promise, a declaration of loyalty and protection that resonated deep within her. He wasn't just talking about the land, he was talking about her, about Lily. She reached out, her hand finding his calloused fingers closed around hers, a silent, powerful bond in the face of a dangerous world. The first sign of the town's betrayal came from Jebediah, the storekeeper. When Silas rode in for supplies, Jebediah was colder than usual. "Heard you got trouble out at your ranch," he said, his eyes shifty. Silas didn't respond. He knew how news traveled in a small town. The gossip was probably already making the rounds. The next day, it was confirmed. Sheriff Brody, a man more concerned with keeping the peace than with justice, rode out to the ranch. He was a big man, and he seemed to fill the air with his presence. "Silas," he said, his voice a low rumble, "I'm told you're harboring a fugitive." "She ain't a fugitive," Silas said, standing on the porch. "She's a widow, run from men trying to take her land." "The law's complicated, Silas," Brody said, his eyes scanning the ranch. "Those men, they got family in high places. They've gone to the judge in the next county. They got a court order saying they've got the right to take her back to face a legal challenge to her claim. It's a ruse. You and I both know it, but the paper says so." "And you're going to just hand her over?" Silas asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I have to, Silas. It's the law," Brody said, but his gaze didn't meet Silas's. "I'm telling you as a friend. They'll be here with a posse in the morning. Let her go now, and there won't be any trouble." Ilara, who had been listening from the door of the bunkhouse, stepped out, holding Lily. "I won't go with them," she said, her voice firm. "They'll never let me challenge them in a fair court. They'll take Lily from me." Brody looked at her, then at the baby. A flicker of sympathy crossed his face, but it was quickly replaced by a weary resignation. "I'm sorry, Ilara, but my hands are tied." Silas stepped forward, his body a shield between Brody and Ilara. "Your hands may be tied, Brody," he said, his voice a low growl, "but mine aren't. You tell them that if they want her, they'll have to come through me." Brody nodded, a grim expression on his face. "I'll tell them," he said, and turned his horse around. The sun was setting, casting long, ominous shadows. Ilara looked at Silas, her heart pounding. The sheriff, the law itself, was against them. They were truly alone now, with only their shared will and a rifle to stand against the coming storm. That night, Ilara couldn't sleep. The wind howled, a low, mournful sound. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of the sagebrush sounded like the approach of the posse. Silas sat on the porch, his rifle across his lap, a silent sentinel. She joined him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice quiet. "This is my fight. You've already done so much." He didn't turn his head, his gaze fixed on the dark horizon. "It stopped being your fight the moment I stepped in that store. We're in this together, Ilara. We'll face it together." His words were not a promise, but a statement of simple, profound truth. They were a team, a small unit against a world that had tried to break them. He told her his own story, a simple tale of a ranch hand who had saved up for years to buy his own small piece of land. He spoke of the solitude, the back-breaking work, and the simple joy of building something with his own two hands. His story wasn't one of grand adventure, but of quiet persistence, a testament to his character. "I know what it's like to have something you worked for threatened," he said. "I won't let them take it from you." Just before dawn they heard them, the sound of hooves on the hard-packed dirt, the jingle of spurs, the low murmur of men's voices. Silas stood, his body tensed and ready. He helped Ilara get into position, showing her where to take cover, where the best vantage points were. The posse rode into view, a dark mass against the grey light of a new day. Thomas's cousins were at the front, their faces grim and determined. The sheriff, Brody, was with them, his presence a heavy weight of official authority. The leader of the cousins, a man named Jed, called out, his voice echoing in the still air, "Silas! We've got the law with us! Hand her over, and there won't be any trouble." "The law ain't here," Silas called back, his voice cutting through the morning stillness. "Only men who think a piece of paper is a substitute for justice." A shot rang out, a warning shot that whizzed past Silas's head and embedded itself in the wooden post behind him. The fight had begun. The gunfight was brief but fierce. Silas fought with a cool, deadly efficiency, his shots precise and deliberate. Ilara, with her newfound training, provided covering fire, her heart hammering in her chest. She had never fired a gun in anger before, but she wasn't fighting for land. She was fighting for Lily's future, for the peaceful life they had built. One of the cousins went down, a cry of pain escaping his lips. Another man from the posse was grazed, his yelp of surprise a jarring sound. Sheriff Brody, who had been an observer, finally raised his hands. "Enough!" he bellowed. "Jed, this is getting out of hand. You're not getting the land this way. This is not how we do things." Jed, enraged and nursing a wounded arm, ignored him. He charged towards the cabin, but Silas, anticipating the move, stepped out and leveled his rifle. The sight of the unflinching cowboy, his gaze as cold and hard as stone, made Jed falter. "You want to die for a piece of land, Jed?" Silas said, his voice a low, chilling threat. "Is it worth your life?" Jed's eyes darted from Silas to the other men, who were now looking at each other, their bravado gone. They had come for an easy victory, not a life-or-death battle. They were outmatched, and they knew it. Jed hesitated, his face contorted in a mask of fury and frustration. He finally lowered his rifle, a look of defeat settling on his face. "This ain't over," he spat, the same hollow threat as before. "It is for now," Silas said, not a hint of triumph in his voice. The posse turned and rode away, leaving the wounded man to tend to his arm. Silence descended once more, but this time it was the silence of victory. Silas walked over to Ilara, who was leaning against the cabin wall, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. He took the rifle from her hands, his touch gentle. "It's over," he said, his voice soft. "They'll think twice before they come back." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. He had risked everything for her, for them. He had faced down the law and lawless men alike, all for a woman and a baby he had met just a few weeks ago. "Thank you, Silas," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. He reached out and with a tender touch wiped a tear from her cheek. He didn't say a word, but his gaze held a depth of affection that she finally allowed herself to believe. The days after the confrontation were filled with a quiet resolution. News of the gunfight spread, and the townspeople who had been wary now looked at Silas with a newfound respect. Sheriff Brody came by a few days later, not to arrest Silas but to apologize. "I was wrong, Silas," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I should have stood with you. That land, they were just trying to take advantage of a widow. I'm sorry." Ilara, who was standing beside Silas, saw the sincerity in the sheriff's eyes. He wasn't a bad man, just a man caught between the law and what was right. The town, in its own silent way, rallied. A few of the older women came out to the ranch, bringing food and offering to help with Lily. They didn't ask questions. They simply offered a quiet, unassuming support. Ilara had a community now, a network of people who had witnessed Silas's bravery and her own quiet strength. One evening, as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, Ilara sat on the porch with Silas. The air was cool, the silence comfortable. Lily was sleeping soundly inside. "What will you do now, Ilara?" Silas asked, his voice low. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have the deed to the land. I could sell it. Or I could try to make a go of it. Thomas always wanted to build a farm." Silas was silent for a long moment, watching the fading light. "You could stay here," he said, his voice a little rougher than before. "We could make a go of it, the three of us." Ilara's heart fluttered. She looked at him, at the quiet strength in his face, the kindness in his eyes. He wasn't a man for grand speeches, but this simple offer, this quiet question, meant more than 1,000 declarations of love. "And what about your ranch?" she asked softly. "It's big enough for both of us," he said, his gaze meeting hers. "Big enough for a family. We could build something, Ilara, not just a house, but a life." It was not a proposal, not in the traditional sense, but an offer of partnership, of shared hardship and shared joys. It was a promise built on the foundation of trust, resilience, and quiet understanding. Ilara reached out and took his hand. His fingers, rough from a lifetime of labor, were a comfort against her own. "I'd like that, Silas," she said, her voice filled with a profound and simple joy. "I'd like that very much." The next day, Silas rode out to the land she owned. He didn't go to sell it. He went to stake it, to start the first preparations for a new homestead. He was building something for them, a new life from the ashes of her old one. Ilara, standing on the porch of the cabin, watched him ride away, a silhouette against the rising sun. Lily was in her arms, her small, warm body, a testament to all they had survived. The shawl, the one she had tried to sell for milk, was wrapped around Lily, a symbol of the moment that had brought them together. It was a tangible reminder of the kindness of a stranger, the courage of a man who had faced a hostile world to protect her, and the new life that was now unfolding before her. The American West was a harsh place, a land of brutal landscapes and unforgiving realities. But it was also a place of opportunity, a place where a new life could be forged from the broken pieces of the old. Ilara had lost a husband and a home, but she had found a sanctuary, a protector, and a future. The story wasn't about a grand, heroic rescue. It was a quiet drama of human connection, of resilience in the face of despair, and of a love that was not a sudden flame, but a slow, steady ember, nurtured in the quiet moments of shared grief and simple, everyday kindness. As the sun rose higher, casting a golden light over the land, Ilara knew that the road ahead would be difficult. There would be more challenges, more threats, more struggles. But for the first time in a long time, she was not afraid. She had a home, a purpose, and a partner who had looked at her in her moment of greatest despair and said, "You'll have milk, and you'll have me." And that, in the vast and lonely world of the West, was everything.